All right, we are live on the YouTube live streaming service, Manuel. Are you familiar with that platform?
A little bit.
Welcome to the show. How you
Thank,
doing?
thank you, Tom. It's so great to see you again and catch up.
Yeah, man. Well, for those who don't know you, why don't you give us a little introduction to who's Manuel Bronstein and what your day job is, and then we'll talk about product management.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. I'm Manuel. I'm the CPO at Roblox, and basically I lead the product design, data science functions at the company. I've been in consumer products in technology, entertainment, and media for I don't know the past 20 years, and had has the fortune to work at amazing products and companies like Xbox, YouTube, Zynga, Google Assistant, and now at Roblox. Consumer product person at heart, and I've been lucky to work in the entertainment space, which tends to be super fun, and also in platforms that it's part of what I love, building platforms.
Awesome. How did you first get into product management? Is that something you did early in your career, or was it something you transitioned into?
No, I transitioned into. I grew up in Venezuela, and so product development, product management was not a common role. I actually majored in electrical engineering and did a funny thing, which is I went to work at Procter and Gamble marketing detergents, which has nothing to do with what I studied. But I learned a lot, and it was an amazing experience. But one of the things that I realized actually doing marketing and brand management for detergents was that I didn't love the idea that a product was handed to me and then I needed to go out and sell it.
Hmm.
Actually, was realized very quickly that I was more excited to think about how do you build a product that matters, how do you delight people, how do you actually do something that solves a real problem, and I also wanted to work in tech. So, after a few years at P&G, I had an amazing opportunity to join a startup in New York. So it was a leap to move from Venezuela to New York and actually join a startup in the consumer entertainment space. It's gonna be funny. It was 2000, and it was online trading cards. So if only we knew about the NFT craze back then. And there was no social media, there was no social graphs and smartphones, so it was a web product, but it was super super fun. And then after that startup, I went to business school, and I did had a sense already that, hey, I think I like this notion of product design, product development, product management. So I took a few classes, did my internships in that space, and then joined Xbox, and the rest is history.
I remember in college thinking about careers, after graduation, and I remember Procter and Gamble brand manager roles was considered like a highly sought after kind of preparation to become a future CEO type thing. What was it like as a working at P&G?
It was truly amazing, and I'll date myself, but it was roughly 20 years ago, if not more. And the amazing thing is that I still bring up examples, and I was an
Mm,
assistant brand manager, and I still bring examples of the things that I learned there. They had a very methodical way to teach you how to be a great brand marketer. And I remember I joked that during my interview, I was very naive, and I don't know if you ask these questions in interviews these days, but I told them, "Hey, I'm an electrical engineer. Why are you guys talking to me?" And they said, look, we like your problem solving and analytical background that comes from the degree that you have, and we believe that we can teach you the mechanics and the art of being a marketer. And it was super phenomenal, their training, their attention to detail, and grooming you to just continue to grow down that track and eventually be a general manager was very very deliberate, and I appreciated that a lot.
can you think of an example of something you learned marketing detergent that still would apply, working on a, meta universe of platform thing that you are now?
Yes, of course. Look, one of the things that when you're working on a product that seems like a commodity, like a detergent, you really start thinking about what does your product stand for and how do you differentiate from the 300 other detergents on the
Hmm.
shelf, right? So a lot of the questions come to how do you understand what matters and what's the criteria that people use when they choose a detergent. What are the attributes that they look for? Is
Mm-hmm.
it cheap? Is it smells well? Does it is it the best at stain removal? So you actually start figuring out what are the key attributes that will drive demand for the product, and then of course you hone your product development to deliver on the attributes that you believe you want to own, and then you market them like crazy, right? And repeat the message time and
Mm-hmm.
again that you're the best at stain removal. And I think that lesson applies to any product you want to build, right? You need to understand what are the attributes that matter when people are making a decision. You need your product development and your marketing to be in sync to communicate and develop those things. And I think that those things completely apply, 20 years later.
It's so it makes perfect sense when you say it. And then I think we've all worked in tech environments where the energy is more around sort of the technology challenge or like the coolness of this thing. And it's easy to kind of lose sight of like the customer problem we're solving and the attributes that they're kind of measuring us against. Do you have you noticed that? And how do you remain, kind of customer obsessed in a tech kind of in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, look, I think you can, and I think
Mhm.
and I think many companies do or many teams do. I agree with you that sometimes you could see things that feel a little bit more tech driven. So we
Mm,
found a great technology. What do we do with it? Or sometimes some decisions or projects could be very business driven, but oftentimes they are consumer driven as well, right? Or customer driven. They understand that there's a problem in the marketplace that they want to solve, and they go for it. And I think, look, I back in my life at Xbox, I run an incubation team, and we came up with this thing we call the ignition triangle, and it says like, hey, in every vertex of the triangle, you have one thing. In one you have technology, in the other you have the user, and in the other one you have the business. And any idea or any product could get originated by some driver in one of these angles,
mm,
but at the end of the day, you want to have a solution that has all the three. So it could start with a consumer problem, then you figure out is there a technology to address it, and if you have a technology, you think about how do you build a business on top of that. It could start with a business need, and you think about, okay, what problem do I need to solve so that consumers care or customers care about this, and what is the technology that I'm going to use. So I think you strike the balance between those things. Of course, a ton of innovation and a ton of vision driven companies could be start with a breakthrough in technology, and then you think about the applications of that breakthrough, and then you start building a product and then a company on top of that.
let's talk a little bit about that Xbox experience. um I remember when it first was announced, a lot of people were skeptical that what the guys that make Excel and Windows are gonna try and be relevant in the gaming space. What was that like? What was your experience like
Oh,
there?
oh my god, it was amazing. I cherish that experience a lot. We the Xbox team felt a lot like rebels in a rental building, using sometimes Macs and iPods. At the time when Microsoft was not very friendly to those things,
Yeah.
and it was super super fun because there was a ton of energy, and it was very vision led. There was a big understanding. I think that the breakthrough in Microsoft was we can build something that is extremely friendly to the developer community. Developing console games hasn't been always that easy.
Mm,
There's a lot of people who maybe develop for PC that could actually become, console developers. But beyond that, it was a lot about. I mean, a lot of these people came from DirectX. There's an amazing, by the way, YouTube documentary called Power On that is recounting the early days of Xbox. It's like a 5 episode, and I was you watch it the other day, and it brought so many memories. So
mm,
yeah, it was a stretch in some by some people imagination, getting aggressive into hardware, getting into a consumer product that you needed to battle for consumer attention. There wasn't two well established players in Nintendo and Sony with PlayStation. So it was, Microsoft was not always coming from behind, back in 2000.
mhm.
And it required a lot of passion, a huge investment, a ton of belief and conviction. And even if you look at the results, the first generation wasn't that successful if you measure it by market share or by dollars or whatever. But still, the company had the strength and stamina to continue and the perseverance to continue doing it. The second generation was really, really good. And now you fast forward to now 2022, and you see Microsoft acquiring Activision, which is kind of like amazing, right? It's really, really
Yeah.
amazing that this is happening.
When you think back about your Xbox years, was there what was an area where you grew as a leader, or a lesson that you learned that you still kind of take with you?
Yeah, Microsoft was the first time that I went from an individual contributor to a manager, and
Hmm.
I did it in a rocky way because it's actually when I took over the incubation team. Not only I had to lead product managers or program managers at Microsoft, but I had to lead engineers and designers. And so, from someone who had never managed before to become a multifunctional manager, actually, it happened to be by the design of this team that some of these people were even senior to me. So it was very rocky. You come from you're an individual contributor, you do all the things by yourself, and suddenly you need to start learning how do you build with others and how you build through others. How do you set expectations that are not necessarily implying that people need to work in the same way that you would have worked, right?
Hmm.
So and you start learning that when you start trusting and letting people do those things, they start to surprise you, right? And they start in a positive way, right? They start doing things in different ways or in better ways that you would have ever done it. And that gave me a good appreciation for what it means to scale through others, what it means to actually the effort and the attention that you need to put in developing and nurturing a team and rallying people, and be part, leader, be part motivational and inspiration, be part driver of execution. So it was super, super fun, and I learned a lot in that transition.
Yeah, I remember. I don't know what it's like today, but certainly at that period, Microsoft was the center of influence was definitely engineers had a lot of influence there. And now you're managing a team, a cross-functional team, including engineers. What did you do to kind of earn the credibility and the trust and the relationships? Given that I'm guessing some of them might have been like, oh, man, well, he's a MBA Procter and Gamble guy.
Yeah, probably I got some of that. Look, I think that what I didn't know and what I wasn't good at, I made it up with a ton of effort and showing them that I was right by their side, working as hard as I could to make things happen. And I think that they did appreciate the work ethics in
Mm,
the areas that I had just to work it harder. I also anchored on the things that I knew I could do better or believe that I could do better, right? That empathy for the user, that understanding of the business case for the projects that we were putting together, that understanding of how do you present the value proposition and how do you talk about them. So for people who were actually very eager and excited about their technologies and they wanted to build them and ship them, I helped them package that into something that could be sold to the company as this project is worthwhile doing and this project is worthwhile investing in. So it became very symbiotic, right? I became a conduit for the engineers to do the best work that they wanted to do, and that was a way in which I was adding value.
and eventually, after many years and accomplishments and growth at Microsoft, you went to Zynga, which I think all of us, well, many of us remember getting all the Farmville stuff in our feeds. Tell me about that. What was it? How did you decide to make that switch? And what was that experience like?
Yeah, no, it was a big leap. Look at after 7 or 8 years at Xbox, it was 7 years or so at
Mm,
Xbox. One of the things that you need to decide when you work in the console space, at least at that time, was you just wrapped up one generation of the console. Are
right.
you signing up for the next one? And they tend to be 7 to 10 year cycles. So I felt that I had done and learned a lot working on the console space, and I loved it. But I was craving this notion of products where you could move faster, iterate faster.
Hmm.
Uh, my last project at Xbox, or one of my last projects at Xbox, I built one of the first games as a service on a console. And what that meant is that we were updating the game every week or every month based on the
Mm,
data that we were actually getting from the performance of the game, which is not traditional console development, right? Because you were putting together a game in a disc, you sold it for $60. You could argue that you could forget about it, even though over time people do like updates and downloads.
mhm,
But in this case, it was more a game that was built on the basis of engagement. And right at that time, social gaming was beginning to take off, and social gaming was also built as a game as a service, and as products that actually try to understand what people were doing inside those environments and figuring out what they needed to do the next week to maintain an audience, engage, and coming back to the same product. So there were already good connections there. My desire to move to work with something more fast paced, the excitement around this notion of games as a service and social games. And then I also wanted to come to the Valley. I had been in Seattle, loved it, had a great time there. But I wanted to be closer to the startup community, to the investing community. It's a passion of mine. So it became a really good opportunity for me to take the leap. And Zynga reached out. We had some great conversations, and I ended up joining. I think it was in 2010.
mm. Before we get into the Zynga experience, what do you think was like the biggest thing you learned at Microsoft?
The interesting thing about Microsoft, and again, when you work on a console and you work on projects that are 2 years or even 3 or 4 years out, and you work on a project, take the example of a piece of hardware like a console where what you're shipping should be relevant 3, 4, 5 years from the day you ship it.
Mm,
You learn to develop this conviction and this ability to say, this is what I believe will happen. This is what I believe will be important. And it's a little bit less data driven than your daily routine when you're actually trying to grow DAUs on an existing product. So I think that that part of working on the console, the power of telling a story, the power of narrative, and painting a vision and a picture of the future, uh, the ability to rally the troops and energize people based on a vision of a future you want to build, I think were some of the things that the Xbox team did phenomenally well, and I had the fortune to learn from them and practice it myself as well.
what would you do in situations where you get new data and it challenges one of your assumptions, but you're kind of in this 7-year cycle? How do you manage that?
Yeah, look, sometimes, I mean, it depends on the case, right? If it's something that the new information is telling you that you're doing something wrong, and there is, all these systems are interconnected somehow. So is there time and room to address it? You try to understand the risk and severity and
Mhm,
decide if that's worthwhile doing something about. And if it's worthwhile doing something about and it's possible to do something about, you do it. If it's not it's not really that it's not possible. It may be that the cost of making the change is too great. Then you need to decide, are you willing to make these trade-offs? Of course, the second thing was Xbox was probably the first console that actually thought that software could be updated on the console and you could reshape the UI and you could
mhm.
reinvent a few things. So thankfully, we did have the opportunity to improve the product after we shipped it, which was a super cool thing to have that opportunity.
So tell me about, the Zynga, experience. It must have been crazy. Like, I remembered it was growing like a weed for a long time, right?
Yeah, look, it was a very phenomenal company, and it's still. I mean, now it got sold, and it's been an amazing journey for the company and for some of the people there. Look, it broke grounds on many levels, right? It understood social, bad term virality mechanics very, very well. It understood this notion of, hey, if you have this experience, which is a game and an entertainment experience, and you measure and learn what people are doing every day, you could start tweaking it and making it better, or looking where there's heat in the experience and
Mm,
then invest your time there. And and it became a culture of around metrics and insights, and understanding how funnels work, understanding how you could grow things, understanding where you needed to spend your time. and understanding what it means to develop a muscle of being a very data driven company and culture. And yes, to your point, for a while it was growing crazy. It was very phenomenal to see it. And look, people, the type of people that the company was able to hire, putting myself aside, it was very powerful because it was a hot company that was doing very phenomenal things. So amazing people came to the company. They are now doing, many of them, amazing things all over the valley. Of course, the other thing that happened that was amazing is that in 4.5 years that I was there, we went through all the cycles. We went through hyper growth, going public. Oh my God, the platform is changing on us. Oh my God, mobile is actually the thing that is coming. How do you turn this thing around? And look, I say only for 4.5 years. So I was there at the beginning of the full transition to mobile and to a studio company. And I'm happy to see that, after 7 years or 10 years after that, the company really built back to some of their promise in a different incarnation, I would say, but still, was able to build some loving, beloved franchises, word of mouth, what is it, Worth with Friends, Poker, Farmville, and many of these things. And now it had a very happy outcome. Hey, Tom, you froze on me.
Manuel,
You're back.
well, I just lost power in my
Oh my
house.
God. And how
I'm
are
on
you doing?
I'm on battery power on the laptop and on my mobile hotspot, and I'm hoping that the power comes back on shortly. As you can
Let's
see.
cross fingers.
Yeah, yeah. But you were we were talking about Zynga and how you saw all of the different cycles and had all these great people. You also mentioned that it was very data driven and focused on like the hotspots. And I'm wondering, how did you balance that very kind of scientific approach to evolution of a product with creativity and kind of taking risks and kind of the holistic kind of ideation process?
Yeah, look, I want to say it was probably one of the hardest challenges at the company, because with the metrics driven approach came, well, let's do the things that we can measure, and sometimes measuring impact tomorrow or the next week is a lot easier than measuring impact a year from now. So it did drive a lot of decisions that felt a little bit like local maxima sometimes. We did have plenty of opportunities, when a new project, a new game was going to be developed. There was a ton of opportunity to exercise creative juices and think about visioning and think about where we think this new platform or these things could go. And some of the games, of course, had a lot of like big, massive updates that were the opportunity to do that. But it was, I want to say it was hard. It was hard because those optimizations that move the needle were a lot easier to approve and decide on and measure and deliver than things that were feeling more like a leap of faith, right? and
Mhm.
and I
Yeah,
think in my personal case, because of my Xbox experience, which was more about that leap of faith for many years,
right.
um, I had a good opportunity to try as best as possible to strike the right balance. But the culture was heavy on the data side, which again had a lot of positives but had some gaps that could have been improved on.
Do you think in the long run, like, did that contribute to some of the challenges that Zynga later encountered? Like this kind of passion about the measurable, quantifiable product development versus the leaps of faith?
I think it had to. It definitely had an influence in it. I think that, if you look at Zynga as a textbook case, you will look a little bit of innovator's dilemma, because the company was thriving on a platform like Facebook. And I think many people understood the risk of being heavily dependent on a single platform at the time, but also it was really, really hard to branch out. So it was not a trivial decision to make. And then the transition to mobile happened, and it started small again when all your revenues are coming from one single place, but it suddenly became extremely fast. But to the credit of the company navigated the pivots and ended up building a multi-billion-dollar revenue company and market cap. So I think there are good learnings. I think there are good lessons. I think that the passion and the analysis for data and building a data culture was very good. I think that what would have been a good balance to that was understanding when those things were just going to lead you to local maximas and incremental innovation. When do you need to have more leaps of faith and intuition? And how do you really strike the balance and take the long view on things that are, a few years out or a few months out, and not just worry about the immediate, weekly result?
What advice do you have for PMs who are thinking about advocating for one of those leaps of faith when the existing business that they're working in already has plenty of projects going on and the inertia is with the roadmaps that have been approved, and here you are saying, hey, I think we should do something a little different, and you don't have all of the data available by definition because it's a leap of faith. How
Yeah.
would you advise people to do that?
Look, I think it starts with the traditional, and this goes back to you were asking me some of the lessons learned from, say, the PNGs and the Xbox.
Hmm.
Like, you need to, first of all, you need to build your own conviction that that's something that it's worthwhile betting on risking, and potentially even risking your career on, if you're so convict, if you have such a strong conviction. Then you intuition really is the sum of all the information that you have, whether it has been things you have read, things you have done, things you have seen in the past, things you have worked on, or even research you have done. But then now you need to be able to convert that into something that you can tell other people and that you can actually convince other people, right? So telling an amazing narrative, looking for your allies and looking for the people who are going to get equally excited as you about this thing, and start building cloud on momentum. And then looking for your champions, looking for more people, maybe a little bit more senior in the organization, or maybe a couple of levels above, that it's matching. Maybe they have the hunger for growing their business or disrupting their business, or they have some extra ideas or budget to take some bets. And then you go and you tell that story. And I have seen it happen at many companies, right? It doesn't happen every day and it's not trivial. Xbox, was a big one. I think that several projects at Google, didn't exist, and someone really, really rallied behind them and made them happen. So I think that all it takes is, it's not easy, but all it takes is the energy, the passion, the conviction, and of course you need to be right, and that's not that easy.
You've been a VP and now a C level at a lot of different places. And I'm guessing you've been on the receiving end of PMs advocating for leaps of faith. Can you think about times when you've seen it done well and effectively, and then times where you're like, wow, that person's really bright. They're advocating for something. I'm not quite ready to go there. What's the difference between the successful ones and the ones that are less successful?
It's a great question. I think some the preparation, the passion, and the conviction from the person asking for it and telling the story, it's probably contagious and very important. So there are some people who will find you in the hallway and will tell you an idea, and then you don't do anything about it, and they don't do anything about it, and that's not going to go anywhere, right? There are some
Hmm.
people who are going to book time with you, are going to walk you through how they're thinking. You're going to tell them a few things of feedback, and then they're going to come back and they're going to say, I thought about what you told me, here's how I'm thinking about it. And there's going to be, hopefully, if they get you excited and if they connected with the right person, because that's the other thing, not every executive at the company is going to be the right person for your idea.
Mm.
And it's a matchmaking process where you need to find that person. You need to find that person, one, two, three levels above you, who's going to be excited about what you're doing, either because they share the same passion or beliefs, or because they're in need of something that is going to help the business grow, or they need that insight, and maybe that insight is coming from you. So I think that the element of the preparation, the how do you tell the story, the perseverance, the willingness to go back and iterate, the willingness to find other people that get excited, and then you have not one person coming to you, but you have like five different people telling you this is interesting, starts to build the momentum, right? And then, there's always a timing thing, right? Do you have the resources right away? Are you in the beginning of a planning process? So this is a great idea for the next round of planning. Uh, Most of these things, hopefully, if they are really big, big leaps, they're not urgent in the sense that they don't need to happen tomorrow.
Hmm.
What's important is that there's conviction in the company that that's a direction where you want to go, and then you start making the investments, and you decide to accelerate it or not. And look, I'll tell you one personal one. I had a when I was in the incubation team at Xbox, I had a big idea that I wanted to pursue, and I wrote memos, documents, or whatever. And it was probably in a drawer somewhere for like a year. And a
Mm.
year later, new leadership came into the organization. They were looking for a big bang in terms of relaunching a bunch of things. And I got a call, and I said, like, remember that idea that you pitched a year ago? Can we talk more about it? And it ended up being the project that I ended up shipping and loved. So it was super, super fun.
That's great. Yeah, it's timing is so crucial for these things. It's a great point. Let's move on to uh YouTube time. I mean, you were at YouTube and still a amazing growing business. Tell me a little bit without obviously divulging, like from a product leadership point of view, what were some approaches or best practices that you saw work really well there that contributed to the success of that business?
It's an amazing, amazing platform and product. I use it every day. I know billions of people use it every day, and it was pretty amazing and humbling getting to a place where, again, talk about timing and opportunity. Susan's YouTube CEO was also just joining. I think she joined 3 or 4 months before I did.
Hmm.
So of course it was a rebuilding period in terms of the people, the organization, but also the direction of the product and the things that we wanted to do. And it was a time of a ton of innovation in the sense that YouTube Music was launched, YouTube Kids was launched, YouTube Gaming was launched, live streaming started to happen on the platform, and a bunch of interesting things. So I think there was, kudos to Susan and the leadership. There was appetite to do a lot of new things and try a lot of new things and see if we could expand this business in a meaningful way. I think it was the first time that I was operating a product at that scale. Even though Xbox was very successful and scale, but YouTube had probably an order or two of magnitude in terms of the scale that you were operating. Uh, I think I was the last one to realize that. It's funny, like it was really so hard to grok that this product is so amazing and used for by so many people in the planet. One of the lessons learned, it was probably the first time that I was taking a very senior role at a large company with such a large scale. And it was the first time that I had to do okay, it's going to take me a few months. Like, do I have a 90-day plan to meet the right people, understand everything about the business, understand everything I need to do about the company? I realize it doesn't take 90 days to do that. It may take a year to do that in a product as massive and complex and interesting as YouTube. And it built that muscle of patience in understanding what it means to transition into a new job. How do you build your capital in terms of the people trusting you and people understanding what you can do for them and what you can bring to the table, but also being humble to know that, hey, I could have had many conceptions about the product when I came in, and now I'm learning about them and I'm changing my mind. Although it's always good to keep your notes and the freshness of the things that you bring that you thought before you join, because
Mhm.
it's very easy to get into the inertia and be living in the status quo. So a ton of learning, a ton of thinking about how do you transition from a new job to this one and operate at scale, and then looking always for the ways in which you can add value very early on to build the trust, build the credibility, and then with that trust and credibility, push some of the agendas that you have and the things that you believe in that you think that the company should be doing.
How should a new person joining a team, often at a senior level, like how should they think about building that initial credibility when they're still trying to figure out, how the place works. But to your point, like they need to start somewhere and need to start getting some momentum.
Yeah. Look, I think the first thing I mentioned is there's a period to listen and learn and take notes and absorb and start writing things down, and then turning those insights into, hey, I now can communicate and articulate what I have seen, where the opportunities, what are the opportunities that I see, what is the goodness that I see, and the more, by the way, that you recognize the goodness before you try to change everything,
Mm,
it's a good thing, right? Because people feel connected to you because you're telling them in some ways that they're doing a good job in some areas. The other
mhm,
thing is that, if you're joining a company in that senior level ship and level role, it's for something, right? Someone looked something that you had that you could bring to the table and that you can help with. You need to understand what that is. You need to understand why they brought you over, and then you start exercising that muscle a bit more, right? I had, from a Zynga standpoint, I had the data-driven side of things. From a gaming standpoint, I had a gaming background. So when YouTube was thinking about YouTube gaming, clearly was an area where I could bring some background and expertise and credibility to the table, right? So you find those
mhm.
openings where the strength and the reasons why you brought over start to make a ton of sense. And that's a great way to start building the credibility that then can translate or expand into adjacent places, until you really, have a foothold in all the areas that you're leading and managing.
So speaking of like why people hired a person, a leader, and that person's individual strengths, what is your philosophy on um, developing your own skills over time? Specifically, I think a lot of people struggle with leaning into their superpowers versus kind of shoring up areas where they're not as strong. Has your view on that changed as your career has progressed, or how do you think about it?
No, look, but I'm sure that it has changed. If I go back in time when I think everything was new and I was learning everything, and I didn't know anything. Not that I know a lot more now, but hopefully I know a few things. Look, I think that I have been a fan of leaning in on my strength, and both, whether it's the traits and the skills that I bring to the table, but also the industry or the subject matter expertise that I bring to the table, and use that as a catalyzer to learn and become very useful in the other areas, right? Sometimes it may take you longer than desired. If there's a lot of things, if you got a big scope, and there's a ton of opportunity in the areas that you know very well, and you still, there are some other areas that you need to learn a little bit more. It's easy to just anchor in on the ones that you know very well and try to make a big impact there. But I still think that that's better than trying to fully learn the new at the beginning, and, as I said, not having the opportunity to add tremendous value, again, for the reasons that people
Mm.
hire you, for the people that people invited you to the team. Hopefully, if you can do the two things, if you can do that transition in a timely manner, then a lot of the good outcomes and the good, leadership that you had in the areas where you were strong are gonna propel you to do a good job in the other areas, and people are gonna be happy that you're getting immersed in areas where maybe you were not an expert before.
Yeah. Uh, let's talk a little bit about how you build teams, Mel. What do you look for in product managers? What makes a great product manager?
Look, I think that there are a few traits. I mean, an insane amount of curiosity is super important, and it manifests in multiple ways. And hopefully, when people are working in areas that they're passionate about, that curiosity is gonna propel a ton, right? Because they're gonna read about the company, they're gonna play with the products, they're gonna talk to people in the industry. They're really gonna immerse in the area, not because it's a job, but because they really care about it. And then that means that they are going to be self-learner and lifelong learners. They're going to be ahead of the pack because they are absorbing everything that is happening and connecting the dots. To me, that's a very, very, very powerful trait, and I think it's important, to look into. I think that the ability to execute and get things done is also very important, and that collaboration is a big part of that. As a product manager, you're going to be working with either other product managers or people in different disciplines like engineering, design, data science, and so forth. And you need to be a good team player. You need to be able to work with others, evangelize ideas, listen, and be able to, build cloud and get people to rally behind your projects and your ideas. The ability to tell a story, narrative, is super important too. Why did you do the things that you did? Why is this going to be important? How is the world going to change when you build this thing? Like, that's super, super powerful, especially as you continue to evolve in your career, because you know when you become a CEO, CPO, VP, maybe you have the cloud that, hey, you're the boss, so you can tell us what to do, right? But when you are in the earlier part of your career, it's your ability to convince others what's going to get you to work on things that you really want to work on and you're super passionate about. So that narrative telling and that ability to craft a story, combining everything, the data, the insights, the user research, the competitive landscape, is a super, super, super powerful skill. um, those are some of the things. I mean, of course, there's subject matter expertise in some of the areas that you're attacking. That's slightly less important. uh, Familiarity with data, with technology, of course, is critical. But I think those traits like curiosity, being able to work very well with others, and being able to craft powerful narratives, probably are at the top of the list for me.
How do you and I should warn you, Manuel, I might drop off suddenly due to my battery dying, but hopefully we'll get through this final question. How do you evaluate PMs for those traits in these, 45-minute interviews? What are your best practices for the hiring managers out there?
Well, I'll tell you the first thing, which is I'm not such a strong believer in the just 45-minute interview. So when I'm hiring someone senior,
Hmm.
I'll probably meet with them more than once for more than 45 minutes over time. I also am big
Hmm.
on the people who have worked with you in the past, like the references. And I think, look, how much can I learn in 4 or 5 minutes that someone that has worked with you for 5 to 5 years, they probably can tell me a lot more and with a lot more detail. So I think that I place a ton of value in those. But I think that there's a good set of questions and conversations that you can have where you're going to see how the person is telling the story of what they worked on. You're going to see how they are willing to share their struggles and the areas where they had to learn. You're going to see how proud they are about what they accomplished and why. And I think some of these questions are the ones where I get the most value in the conversation, is having the person talk about the thing that they love the most that they did in their career. Tells you a lot about the person. Also, having the person tell you the time where they learn or fail is also super something that you start learning from the person. And then, the curiosity could manifest in how much they try to learn about you and the company before they met with you. And if they have done
Hmm.
their research and if they have a point of view of where things should go, you start learning that from the conversations.
Yeah, that's great advice. Maybe I'll ask a final closing question, Manuel. I really appreciate you, by the way, taking so much time, and also your patience with my awesome Northern California power reliability here.
No worries.
um, what would you say is like maybe some of the best advice you've gotten career wise or from as a product leader, either one that you could share with those who are watching this or listening this later on replay?
Yeah, look, I think from a career standpoint, one of the best pieces of advice that I got was to be proactive about your career, which is, hey, we all are sitting in interesting jobs, and because you're working in technology and in some good companies, you can get a bunch of calls for new jobs and new opportunities. And what I have seen for many people is they tend to react to the universe of calls that they're getting instead of taking the step back and
Mm,
say, what is it that I want to do? Who do I want to talk to? What company and what role do I want to have? And it sounds very trivial, but in the grind of working really hard every day and maybe getting an interview call from someone, many people don't take the step back. And as a person, that I respected, told me at the time, look, hey, I went to this person. I said, hey, there are like 4 or 5 companies reaching out to me. And he said, like, you're doing this wrong. You should be deciding where do you want to go, what are the things that you want to do, and then start from there, and then you'll find your way in. So that was super powerful, and that changes the way I did things about my career going forward after having that conversation. So the fact that I remembered, and it was, I don't know, 15 years ago, it means that it stuck with me.
Yeah. And what about advice you've gotten from mentors around product leadership?
As I think I cover some that I have made my own, but this notion of having conviction and being able to
Mm,
convey what you have, that conviction, is a super important trait for a product leader. And I think we, in this abundance of data, consumer research or whatever, people try to A/B test their way to these things. People try to do just the consumer research to answer the question. And
hmm
what you're really looking for is, but what do you believe? What do you think the world will look like? What do you think this product will do for people? Tell me really what you believe. And hopefully your belief is the result of all this information that you have gotten. But you're
hmm
really measuring that degree of passion, conviction, and then the ability to tell that story. And I think that that's a super powerful thing. The other one I will say, it was more of something that I learned at YouTube, was how powerful having a long-term North Star metric could be, or a North Star goal,
mm,
in the way it rallies the organization and it makes it self-fulfilling. Not many companies have the, let me set a goal 5 years out and let me actually repeat that same goal for 5 years until we hit it. Uh, it takes a lot of work, by the way. It's not a trivial thing to define what that goal is, define a number that is impressive enough and exciting enough to be valid 5 years from now, and
hmm
hopefully have it right. Because if you have everybody grinding for 5 years, or working that for 5 years for that number or that metric or that goal, and it was not well said, then it's not going to go that well.
Totally agree. Well, Manuel, I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom, and I'm definitely taking away the importance of that PM conviction in this world of A/B testing and measure your way around in circles. Sometimes it's
Yes.
important to take a step back and put it all together. So um, please don't be a stranger. Hopefully we'll have another conversation in the future. And thank you again for giving us your time.
Thank you, Tom. Super fun to chat with you. And yeah, we'll hang out in the future.
I look forward to it, man. Keep it real.
All right.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.